Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Colossians today. And we're going to take one more session to introduce the book of Colossians. And yesterday we introduced it. We talked about it being a prison epistle that Paul is writing from actual jail. He'd never been there before, but he knows a lot of people there. He knows the host of the house church there personally, and counts him as a close friend. He knows the preacher, uh, and and uh, and we also said that during the 2 years he spent in Ephesus, he was able to convert people all over Asia, including Colossae. We know this from Acts chapter 19. And we also talked about the heresy that he's writing to address, this notion that we need more. We need more rules. We need more enlightenment. We need something more than what we have in the gospel. And so his point is going to be that in Christ we are sufficient. We don't need anything beyond Jesus. We don't need any rules telling us, don't touch this, don't taste this, don't handle this. We don't need special enlightenment from God more than what we get through the word of Jesus Christ. We don't need to be worshiping angels or anything like that. What we have in Jesus is sufficient. And I said along the way, in making this point, he's going to go um, deeper into theology, into cosmology than he does anywhere else. And it's that uniqueness in the book of Colossians that I want to talk about today. And then tomorrow we'll get into the text, and not very far, just the first 2 verses. But we'll get into the text next time. Um, okay, so Colossians is often linked with Ephesians as a sister book. Both of these cities are in Asia. They're not that close to each other. Colossae is 100 miles due east of Ephesus in the province of Asia. It's close to Hierapolis and to Laodicea, two other congregations we know were planted. We know about this from the New Testament. So it's west. I mean, excuse me, east of Ephesus, 100 miles. But the letters are similar, very similar in the second half. Both of them are prison epistles. Both of them probably written around the same time, or within a few years of each other. Um, and we know that when Paul writes letters, generally his what he does is he writes a hello, establishes his personal relationship and his loving relationship with the church, and then he gets into the theology, into the doctrine. This is what we know about Jesus. You know that I was there and I taught you these things. And this is the truth about Jesus. And then he applies that truth directly to the issues that they're having. In Romans, finally in chapter 14, he gets to the divisions and the racial divisions, the cultural divisions that they're having. Um, y- you know, uh, Corinthians in First Corinthians, there are so many issues they're having, but he doesn't get to those until he's established the doctrine that applies. And the same is true in Colossians. He has a theological section. We could even call it a cosmological section in chapter 1 and 2. And then in the middle of chapter 2, there's a transition where he's getting to the application. And then by the end of chapter 3, he's fully into his application of the things that he had established in the theological portion. When we get to that second part, there are passages in Ephesus that are nearly word for word. We know that they both have these house rules. House to film is a technical word for them. Husbands, wives, children, servants. Um, they both say to sing. Colossians says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly." Ephesians says, "Be filled with the Spirit, singing to each other in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs." Teaching and admonishing, Colossians says, but it's nearly word for word. The parallels are so tight. But the beginning section, that section where he talks about Jesus and who Jesus is, to establish that Jesus is sufficient, that's not like anything else he writes. There's no parallel anywhere else. I mean, there may be a snippet here or there, a line here or there that we can bring into his cosmological, theological section. But it's more like reading John. And of course, he's writing 30 years before John put pen to paper, or at least the text that we have in the New Testament. John's writing in the 90s. He's writing in the early 60s. And so we can't say he's writing like John. John's writing like him. John will take the things that he says in chapter 1 and 2 through about verse 10, and he will himself present them and expand upon them in his gospel and in First John in particular. So it's not like anything else. The book of Colossians isn't. And it says some amazing things about Jesus, things that we can see with our own eyes in the book of Revelation. And of course, let's not forget Colossae is an Asian church. John is writing to the churches of Asia. He mentions 7 who are on a circular mail route there in Asia, but Colossie's right there. And when the letter to the Laodiceans was received, it would have been read at Colossae because it's a sister city. There's a tri-city area: Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. So, so anyway, there are direct connections between the entire corpus of John's writings we have in the New Testament with the first chapter and a half of Paul's writings in the book of Colossians. And as we get into the text, I think we're going to see those pretty clearly. Okay, we are going to pick up with the text next time. We're going to look at verses 1 and 2. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.